After 15 years of apartment living in the city, finding this property felt like discovering buried treasure. 2 acres of land backing up to a small forest, with mountain views and enough space to finally have the garden I had always dreamed about. The previous owners had maintained the basics but had never fully developed the land, which meant I had a blank canvas to work with. The house itself was modest but sturdy, a 3-bedroom ranch style with good bones and a wraparound porch that sold me from the first viewing. The real estate agent had mentioned there was a homeowner association, but assured me it was primarily focused on the common areas and maintaining property values. The monthly fee seemed reasonable for the services provided: community pool maintenance, walking trails, and seasonal landscaping of public areas. At the closing, I received a hefty binder of HOA regulations that I skimmed through before signing. Everything seemed standard and logical. The first 3 months were pure bliss. Spring had arrived in full force, and I spent every weekend working the soil, planting native species and creating stone pathways through what would eventually become an extensive garden. My neighbors to the left, an older couple named the Millers, often waved when they saw me working outside. We exchanged pleasantries, but not much more. The property to my right remained vacant, marked for development but still untouched. It was during the 4th month that I began noticing strange tire tracks cutting across the back corner of my property. At first, I dismissed them, thinking perhaps a maintenance worker had taken a shortcut while servicing the community trails. The tracks were irregular, appearing maybe once a week, and caused minimal damage. I had plans for that area eventually, but had not yet developed it, so I let it slide. By the 6th month, the frequency increased. The tracks became more pronounced, and I occasionally heard the rumble of an engine early in the mornings or late afternoons. One Saturday, while marking out a space for a potential greenhouse, I heard the distinctive sound of an ATV approaching. I stood and watched as a woman in her 40s, wearing expensive athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses, rode directly across my property line, cutting diagonally from the community path toward the direction of the newer houses. She saw me standing there, our eyes meeting briefly, but she did not slow down or acknowledge my presence in any way. The entitlement in that small moment left me speechless. She continued on her way, disappearing around the bend toward what I would later learn was her considerably larger home in the premium section of our development. I told myself not to overreact. Perhaps she did not realize she was crossing private property. The back boundary was marked by stone cairns rather than a fence, though the property line was quite clear on the survey. Maybe the previous owners had given permission for this shortcut, and she simply assumed the arrangement would continue. That evening, I received my first monthly HOA newsletter by email. Scanning through the announcements about upcoming events and maintenance schedules, my attention caught on the digital signature, Karen Thompson, HOA President. Below that was a professional headshot of the very same woman who had ridden across my property earlier that day. A strange sense of unease settled over me as I looked out my kitchen window toward the back of my property. The tire tracks were clearly visible even in the fading light, cutting an ugly line through what I had planned as a meditation garden. Something told me this was not going to resolve itself without intervention. Little did I know that those innocent-looking tracks were the first battle lines in what would become all-out suburban warfare. The next morning dawned clear and bright. I had spent much of the night rehearsing what I would say, determined to handle this situation like the reasonable adult I considered myself to be. Armed with printouts of my property survey and a friendly but firm attitude, I walked the 10 minutes to the address listed for Karen Thompson in the HOA directory. Her house was twice the size of mine, with professionally landscaped gardens and an impressive circular driveway where 3 vehicles were parked: a luxury SUV, a sports car, and the ATV that had been making tracks across my land. I rang the doorbell and waited, adjusting my posture to appear confident but non-threatening. The door swung open to reveal Karen, phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger to indicate I should wait while she finished her conversation. "I do not care what the vendor says. We approve the lighter shade. Make them redo it or find someone who will." She ended the call without saying goodbye and turned her attention to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You are the new owner at 1542 Pinecrest, correct?" she asked, not bothering to introduce herself. "Yes, I moved in about 6 months ago," I replied, extending my hand. "I do not believe we have formally met. I am your neighbor." She shook my hand briefly. "Karen Thompson, I run the HOA board. What can I do for you?" I explained my concern as diplomatically as possible, showing her the property survey with the boundaries clearly marked. "I have noticed ATV tracks crossing through my back property, and yesterday I saw you riding through. I just wanted to clarify that it is actually private property, not a community path." Karen's expression did not change, but something in her eyes hardened. "That path has been used by residents for years. It is the quickest way to the North Trail system." "I understand that it might be convenient," I acknowledged, "but according to my deed, it is part of my property. I have plans for developing that section of the garden, and the ATV traffic is causing damage to the soil and plants." She waved her hand dismissively. "The previous owners never had an issue with it. It is practically a right-of-way at this point. Everyone uses it." "I have not seen anyone else using it," I said carefully. "Just your ATV." "My family and friends use it too," she replied. "Look, I appreciate you coming by, but this feels like you are making a mountain out of a molehill. That back corner is undeveloped anyway." "It is undeveloped for now," I explained, "but I have plans for the entire property. Perhaps we could compromise. Maybe designate specific times when crossing would be acceptable or identify an alternative route." Karen checked her watch. "I have a board meeting to prepare for. The simplest solution is for you to adjust your garden plans to accommodate the existing path. It has been used that way for over a decade." Her tone made it clear the discussion was over. As I walked home, frustration building with each step, I decided to verify exactly what my rights were. The next day, I visited the county record's office and requested all documents related to my property. 3 hours of research confirmed what I already knew. There was no easement, no right-of-way, and no legal obligation for me to allow anyone to cross my land. Over the next several weeks, I tried multiple approaches. I sent a polite follow-up email to Karen with attached documentation proving my ownership. I installed small decorative boundary markers along the property line. I even posted a tasteful, private property sign near the area where the ATV typically entered my land. None of it mattered. Not only did Karen continue using the path, but the frequency actually increased. Now I noticed her adult son using it as well, and occasionally friends who came to visit her. One afternoon, I attempted to flag her down as she approached on the ATV, but she simply accelerated, forcing me to jump aside. "You should be careful where you stand," she called back over her shoulder. "And by the way, the board has concerns about those unapproved boundary markers you installed. As HOA president, I should remind you that all exterior changes need prior approval." Her smile was icy as she continued across my property. That evening, I documented the latest tracks with photographs and started a journal of incidents. The implied threat regarding the HOA was not lost on me. Karen was making it clear that she had power beyond just her personal actions, and she was not afraid to use it. As spring turned to summer, the battle lines were being drawn more clearly every day. The official-looking envelope arrived exactly 1 week after my conversation with Karen. Inside was a formal notice from the Pinecrest Homeowners Association citing me for unapproved landscaping modifications and improper signage. The fine was modest $50, but the message was unmistakable. This was retaliation, plain and simple. I paid the fine immediately but also requested to attend the next HOA board meeting to address the issue. The response came quickly, informing me that the next meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I prepared meticulously, organizing my documentation chronologically and rehearsing a calm, fact-based presentation. The community center was a converted farmhouse near the entrance to our development. As I approached, I noticed several luxury vehicles in the parking lot, including Karen's distinctive SUV. Taking a deep breath, I entered the building and followed the sound of voices to a conference room where about a dozen people were seated around a large oval table. Conversation stopped as I entered. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other board members. She acknowledged me with a slight nod. "Everyone, this is our new resident from Pinecrest Drive who has requested time to address the board. Please have a seat." I noticed she did not use my name, though it had been included in all my correspondence. Taking the only empty chair, I felt the weight of multiple gazes. Some seemed merely curious, others openly hostile. Karen introduced the board members one by one: Vice President Michael Harrington, Treasurer Susan Bell, Secretary David Koch, and Landscaping Committee Chair Patricia Winters. Each gave me a polite but cool greeting. "You have 5 minutes to address your concerns," Karen said, starting a timer on her phone. "Please be concise." For the next 5 minutes, I presented my case regarding the property line, the ATV trespassing, and the damage it was causing. I was careful to stick to facts, avoiding any accusatory language. I even offered several compromise solutions that would allow for limited access while protecting my property rights. As I finished, Karen thanked me curtly and opened the floor to the board. What followed was clearly choreographed. Each board member took turns expressing concerns about my unwillingness to honor community traditions and disruptive attempts to block established access routes. Not once did they address the legal fact that the route crossed private property without permission or easement. Michael Harrington, whom I later learned was Karen's brother-in-law, spoke directly to me. "As a newcomer to our community, perhaps you do not yet understand how things work here. We value cooperation and flexibility. Your rigid stance on this path issue raises concerns about your fit with our community values." Before I could respond, Karen smoothly transitioned to the next agenda item, effectively dismissing me and my concerns. I sat through the remainder of the meeting in stunned silence, watching as the board discussed community issues with practiced efficiency. It became abundantly clear that Karen ran this board with absolute authority, and every member followed her lead without question. Over the next month, the HOA notices came with increasing frequency. My mailbox regularly contained citations for infractions I had never heard of: excessive garden ornaments, unapproved plant species, improper placement of trash receptacles. Each came with a fine slightly larger than the last. I attempted to connect with neighbors, hoping to find allies or at least sympathetic ears. Most were polite but distant, changing the subject whenever the HOA or Karen was mentioned. The Millers, my elderly neighbors, were the only ones who spoke openly with me. "We learned long ago not to cross Karen," Mr. Miller confided one evening as we chatted across the fence. "When we challenged a ruling 3 years ago, we suddenly found ourselves receiving weekly violations for everything imaginable. It is easier to keep your head down." Late one night, unable to sleep as I worried about the mounting fines, I pulled out the massive HOA rulebook and began reading it cover to cover. Armed with a highlighter and sticky notes, I searched for information about the board's authority, appeals processes, and limits to their power. Buried deep in the bylaws, I found crucial information about voting procedures, term limits, and the process for contesting violations. The more I read, the more I realized this was no longer just about an ATV path. This was about power, control, and one person's ability to weaponize a community organization against those who challenged her authority. I was being systematically isolated and pressured to conform. The only question remaining was whether I would surrender or fight back. As dawn broke outside my window, I knew my decision would define not just my place in this community, but my own self-respect. The sound of the ATV engine woke me early on a Saturday morning. I had been up late the night before, poring over HOA bylaws, and had finally fallen asleep just after 3 a.m. Disoriented and groggy, I stumbled to the window just in time to see not one but 3 ATVs crossing my property. Karen led the pack, followed by 2 men I recognized from community events as friends of hers. What stopped me cold was the path they were taking. Instead of the usual route across the back corner of my property, they were cutting directly through the center, where I had spent the past 2 weeks installing an irrigation system for my vegetable garden. Racing outside in my pajamas, I arrived just in time to see them disappear into the woods, leaving behind a scene of destruction that made my stomach drop. Irrigation pipes lay broken and exposed, water spraying from severed connections. Carefully planted seedlings were crushed beyond recovery. The garden bed borders I had constructed from reclaimed wood were splintered and scattered. Months of planning, weekends of labor, and thousands of dollars in materials lay ruined before me. I stood among the wreckage, water soaking my slippers as tears of frustration burned my eyes. This was no longer about inconvenience or principle, this was deliberate vandalism. I took dozens of photographs, documenting every angle of the destruction, then called the police to file a rep. "Lord." The officer who responded was professional but not particularly hopeful. "Without video evidence showing them causing the damage, it is going to be difficult to prove intent," he explained as he wrote up the report. "This will likely be classified as a civil matter between neighbors." That afternoon, I drove to Karen's house, determined to confront her directly. This time, her husband answered the door, a tall man with an expensive haircut and golf tan. "My wife is not available," he stated flatly when I asked to speak with her. "Then perhaps you can explain why she and her friends rode ATVs through my vegetable garden this morning, destroying my irrigation system and plants," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. His expression did not change. "I do not know what you are talking about. Karen and I were having breakfast with friends this morning." "I saw her," I insisted. "I filed a police report. There are tracks leading directly from your property to mine." "Sounds like you are having trouble distinguishing between community property and private land," he said smoothly. "An easy mistake for newcomers. I suggest you review the HOA guidelines more carefully." "The property line is not in dispute," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "I have the surveys, the deed, and the legal documentation." "Then I suggest you take your concerns to the proper channels," he replied, already closing the door. "The HOA has processes for resolving disputes between neighbors." The HOA president is the one trespassing on my property, I exclaimed, but I was now talking to a closed door. Realizing I needed more substantial support, I contacted 3 different law firms that specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. The third attorney I spoke with, Elaine Gonzalez, agreed to meet with me the following Monday. She reviewed my documentation with professional interest, occasionally nodding or making notes. Legally, your position is sound, she confirmed after examining everything. There is no easement on record, no right-of-way established. The property is unquestionably yours to use as you see fit, within zoning regulations. So I can prevent them from crossing my land? I asked. Absolutely. You can post proper no trespassing signs, install physical barriers, whatever you deem necessary. If they continue after explicit notice, they are breaking the law. Her confirmation gave me a surge of confidence that lasted until I returned home to find yet another HOA violation notice, this one citing water waste from the very irrigation system that had been vandalized. The fine was $500. That evening, while researching local contractors who could help repair my garden, I received an unexpected email from a former resident of my house. He had seen my post on a community forum asking if anyone had experienced similar issues with ATV trespassing in the neighborhood. We moved because of Karen, he wrote. She made it impossible to enjoy our property. When we tried to build a fence, she tied it up with HOA red tape for months, then pushed through a new regulation prohibiting fences over 3 feet tall. We gave up and sold the place. Just thought you should know what you are dealing with. His message confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. This was a pattern, not an isolated incident. Karen had systematically driven out previous residents who challenged her authority or convenience. The final straw came 3 days later. Karen appeared at my front door unannounced, a saccharine smile on her face. I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said without preamble. I have a proposal that will make this all go away. I am listening, I replied cautiously. The HOA will waive all current and pending violations, which now total over $2,000, if you will simply designate a 10-foot corridor across your property as a community access path. We will even handle the maintenance. Her offer was nothing short of extortion, and if I decline? Karen's smile did not waver. Then the violations will continue, and the board will be forced to place a lien on your property. HOA bylaws are quite clear about our authority to do so. Eventually, you will either comply or be forced to sell, likely at a significant loss due to the violations on record. As she turned to leave, she paused. You have 48 hours to decide. Choose wisely. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. Fear and frustration gave way to cold, calculated resolve. I would not be bullied out of my home. I would not surrender my property rights. And I would not allow Karen Thompson to win. The first call I made the next morning was to Attorney Gonzalez. I explained Karen's visit and her ultimatum in detail. Elaine listened quietly, then laid out my options with clinical precision. We can fight the HOA violations rough their appeals process, but that could take months and they control the process. We can file a civil suit for harassment and trespassing, but that is also a lengthy process with no guarantee of immediate relief. Or, she paused meaningfully, we can take direct action to secure your property while remaining within both the law and HOA regulations. What kind of direct action? I asked. You have the right to secure your property against trespassers. Nothing in the HOA bylaws you showed me prohibits walls or barriers that conform to local building codes and aesthetic standards. That afternoon, I gathered all the HOA documents relating to property modifications and studied them meticulously. As Elaine had suggested, there were no specific prohibitions against walls, though there were detailed requirements about materials, heights, and finishing. Any structure would need to be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which, unsurprisingly, Karen chaired. I researched local building codes next, confirming that I could build a structure up to 6 feet tall without special permits, provided it met setback requirements from the property line. Armed with this knowledge, I contacted 5 contractors specializing in stone and concrete work, requesting quotes for a decorative but sturdy wall across the specific portion of my property where the ATV path cut through. While waiting for the contractors to respond, I invested in a comprehensive security camera system. The installation technician placed cameras strategically to cover my entire property, with particular focus on the areas where trespassing occurred. The system included motion detection, night vision, and cloud storage of footage. Within hours of activation, I had video evidence of Karen's son crossing my property on his ATV, clearly displaying the no trespassing signs I had installed. Of the 5 contractors I contacted, 3 declined to bid after learning the address, a fact that spoke volumes about Karen's influence in the community. The 4th quoted an exorbitant price that seemed designed to discourage me. But the 5th, a company based in a neighboring town with no connections to our HOA, provided a reasonable estimate and understood my urgency. Robert Chen, the owner, walked the property with me, listening carefully to my requirements. "We can design something that meets all HOA aesthetic guidelines while still being functional as a barrier," he assured me. "Stone facing on a concrete core, decorative but solid." Together, we developed plans for what would appear to be a decorative landscape feature that just happened to completely block the path Karen and her friends used. It would incorporate garden elements and seating areas, disguising its true purpose as a barrier while enhancing the property's appearance. The design complete, I submitted a meticulously prepared application to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. Every requirement was addressed in detail, with material samples, color swatches, and professional renderings. I specifically scheduled the submission to arrive exactly 30 days before my planned construction date. The maximum review period allowed in the bylaws before approval would be automatically granted if no decision was rendered. While waiting for the review process, I consulted with Elaine again, this time bringing along all my documentation of the trespassing, property damage, and harassment. She recommended filing for a temporary restraining order against Karen specifically, based on the pattern of harassment and vandalism. A restraining order might not stop the HOA actions, but it will prevent her from approaching you or your property directly, Elaine explained. More importantly, it creates an official record of the situation. The judge granted a temporary order pending a full hearing, based on the police reports, photographs, and video evidence I had accumulated. Having that legal document in hand gave me a profound sense of relief, the first small victory in what had become an all-out war. 29 days after submitting my architectural plans, with no response from the committee despite multiple follow-up emails, I finalized arrangements with Robert's construction company. According to HOA bylaws, the lack of response constituted tacit approval. Construction would begin in 2 days. That night, I organized all my documentation, property surveys, photographs, video files, police reports, HOA correspondence, and legal filings into clearly labeled folders. I created backup copies of everything storing them both in cloud storage and with my attorney. Whatever happened next, I would be prepared. As I reviewed the wall plans one final time, I felt none of the anxiety that had plagued me for months. In its place was a calm certainty that I was doing the right thing. Karen had underestimated my resolve, my resources, and my willingness to fight back. The wall would be built. The prop, RTY line would be secured. And for once, Karen Thompson would not get her way. The construction crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, the rumble of their trucks breaking the morning silence. Robert Chen greeted me with a firm handshake and a set of finalized plans. "We will start at the property line and work inward," he explained. "The entire project should take about 3 days, weather permitting." Workers unloaded equipment and materials with practiced efficiency. The concrete mixer took position near the road, while other crew members began marking the path for the wall using bright orange spray paint and string lines. I had taken the day off work specifically to be present for this moment, half expecting trouble, but hoping the legal preparations would prevent direct interference. That hope lasted exactly 52 minutes. Karen's SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of my driveway, sending gravel flying. She emerged like a storm cloud, designer sunglasses pushed back on her head, face flushed with anger. Behind her, a second vehicle arrived, Michael Harrington from the HOA board. "What do you think you are doing?" Karen demanded, marching directly toward Robert. "Stop work immediately. This construction has not been approved by the HOA." Robert looked to me, and I nodded reassuringly. "Ms. Thompson," I said, stepping forward with a folder in hand, "this project was submitted for review 31 days ago. According to Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, failure to respond within 30 days constitutes automatic approval." Karen's eyes narrowed. "The committee denied your application yesterday. You should have received notification." "Interesting," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Because I have the certified mail tracking showing it was not sent, and my security camera footage shows no delivery person approaching my house yesterday. Would you like to see?" Michael stepped forward, attempting to project authority. "As vice president of the HOA board, I am ordering this work stopped pending proper review." I handed him a copy of the restraining order. "This legal document prohibits Karen from approaching me or my property. Her presence here now is a violation of that order. As for the construction, everything is properly permitted by the county. The HOA review period has expired according to your own bylaws." Karen pulled out her phone. "I am calling the police." "Please do," I responded calmly. "They are already familiar with this situation, and I would welcome their presence to document any further harassment." Robert, to his credit, kept his crew working throughout this confrontation. The foundation trench was already taking shape, cutting directly across the path that had been the source of so much conflict. The message was unmistakable. The shortcut was being permanently closed. Karen stormed back to her car, phone pressed to her ear. Michael lingered, looking uncertain. "This is going to escalate things significantly," he warned quietly. "The board will not look favorably on this approach." "The board has already demonstrated its bias," I replied. "I am simply exercising my legal rights as a property owner." By mid-afternoon, the police had come and gone twice, once at Karen's summons, and once at mine when she attempted to physically block a delivery of stone facing. Both times, the officers reviewed the documentation and concluded that the construction was legal and the restraining order was valid. Karen was warned that further violations would result in her arrest. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By late afternoon, Curious neighbors walked or drove by slowly, observing the activity. Some looked concerned, others quietly approving. The Millers brought over an ice chest of cold drinks for the construction crew, a small but meaningful gesture of support. That evening, I received an email notification of an emergency HOA board meeting, scheduled for the following night to address unapproved construction and community access issues. Karen had clearly decided to try another angle of attack. Construction continued at a steady pace the next day. The concrete foundation was poured early in the morning, and by afternoon, the stone facing was being applied to the first completed section. The wall was taking shape exactly as designed, 4 feet tall, aesthetically pleasing with natural stone facing, decorative caps, and integrated planters. Robert had even incorporated seating areas on my side of the wall, creating peaceful spots to enjoy the garden view. Karen did not make a physical appearance, but her presence was felt nonetheless. A county code enforcement officer arrived to inspect the work, clearly responding to a complaint. He found everything in order, with all proper permits and setbacks observed. As predicted, Karen called the police again, this time claiming the construction noise violated community standards. The responding officer could barely hide his annoyance at being called out for such a minor complaint during normal business hours. Construction noise is permitted between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., he explained wearily, clearly having delivered this information before. They are well within their rights. By the end of the second day, neighbors I had never spoken with were stopping by to introduce themselves. Some shared their own stories of run-ins with Karen and the HOA board. Others simply expressed quiet support for standing up to what one elderly gentleman called the neighborhood dictator. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was an exercise in futility. Without Karen present due to the restraining order, the remaining board members were unable to take decisive action. Several homeowners who attended reported back to me that the discussion had been contentious, with some residents openly questioning the board's handling of the situation. On the third day, as the wall neared completion, Karen made her most desperate move yet. I returned from a quick lunch break to find her adult son attempting to drive his ATV through the narrow gap, where the final section of wall had not yet been completed. Robert and his crew had formed a human chain to block the attempt while someone called the police. By the time the officers arrived, a small crowd had gathered to witness the confrontation. The spectacle of a grown man trying to force his way through a construction site on an ATV, shouting about community rights, did nothing to help Karen's cause. When he was escorted from the property with a criminal trespass warning, several neighbors actually applauded. As the sun set on the third day, Robert presented me with the final walkthrough of the completed wall. It stretched in a gentle curve exactly where needed, completely blocking the former shortcut while enhancing the beauty of my property. We had done everything by the book, and the result was both functional and attractive. I have built many walls in my career, Robert said as we shook hands, but never one that meant quite so much. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, no longer listening for the sound of ATV engines crossing my land. The community center was filled beyond capacity for the special HOA meeting, called to address what was now being referred to as the wall situation. Extra chairs had been brought in to accommodate the unprecedented turnout. Neighbors who had never attended a meeting before were present, curious to witness the confrontation firsthand. I arrived early, choosing a seat near the front where I could easily address the board. Karen was noticeably absent due to the restraining order, but Michael Harrington presided in her place, looking uncomfortable with the large audience. "Before we begin," Michael announced once the meeting was called to order, "I want to clarify that this is a regular board meeting, not a forum for personal disputes between neighbors." An older woman in the back stood up immediately. When the HOA president is using her position to wage personal vendettas, it becomes a community issue that concerns all of us. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Michael struggled to maintain control of the meeting as more residents spoke up, many sharing their own experiences with Karen's heavy-handed leadership. When I was finally given the floor, I kept my presentation brief and factual. I explained the trespassing issues, documented the property damage, and outlined the steps I had taken to resolve the situation before resorting to building the wall. I presented copies of all communications with the HOA, highlighting the lack of response to my architectural submission within the required timeframe. "The wall is legal, properly permitted, and complies with all HOA aesthetic guidelines," I concluded. "More importantly, it protects my property from further trespassing and damage. I am simply exercising my rights as a homeowner." David Koch, the board secretary, cleared his throat nervously. "Our legal counsel has reviewed the situation and advised that the wall appears to be in compliance with both county regulations and HOA bylaws. Additionally, the board has been advised that pursuing further action against this homeowner could expose the HOA to liability for harassment." The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the audience. Susan Bell, the treasurer, then shared some concerning financial information. "The HOA has spent over $8,000 in legal fees in the past month related to this issue alone. This was not budgeted and will impact our reserves if it continues." What happened next was unexpected. Patricia Winters, the landscaping chair who had been quiet until now, stood up and addressed the room. "I can no longer be part of a board that allows personal agendas to override fairness and common sense. I am resigning my position, effective immediately." Her announcement opened the floodgates. For the next hour, residents voiced concerns about HOA management, questionable financial decisions, selective enforcement of rules, and Karen's leadership style. When someone proposed forming a committee to review the bylaws and board election procedures, hands shot up throughout the room to volunteer. 3 weeks later, a special election was held to fill vacant board positions and vote on proposed amendments to the bylaws. Karen, facing multiple complaints and the ongoing restraining order, withdrew her candidacy. The new board, led by reasonable, transparent members of the community, immediately set to work repairing the damage done by years of autocratic rule. As for me, spring arrived again, and I planted a new garden, this one protected by a beautiful stone wall that had come to symbolize more than just a property boundary. Climbing roses and flowering vines now softened its appearance, transforming what had begun as a defensive structure into a genuine enhancement to the property. My neighbor, Mr. Miller, stopped by one evening as I was watering the new plantings along the wall. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "that wall of yours did more than just stop the ATVs. It broke Karen's power over this community. People remember what it was like before, and nobody wants to go back to those days."